Good morning, everybody. We'll start the webinar shortly, just allowing some participants to come into the event. Good morning, everybody. Looks like we've got quite a few people joining the webinar, so we'll kick off shortly. We'll give it another 30 or 40 seconds just to allow some more people into the event. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning on data quality and management, understanding data integrity and ensuring success. So thank you again for joining us this morning. Hope you find the webinar useful and informative. We do have a Q&A session at the end of the session. It would be great if you could post some questions into the Q&A button. You'll find that in the bottom of the toolbar under the Q&A button. It just has a small sort of question mark around it. Please enter your questions throughout the webinar, and if you need to ask for any technical support or have any general questions, please use the chat box at the bottom. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Alan Perestrello. I'm the Managing Director of Hart, and joining me this morning we have Nuna, Staniaszek, the Director of Communications at IOM3, and Marius Chrysanthou from Bluelight, who's the Managing Director. Wanted to start off by just doing a little bit of a background about Hart and introducing who we are. So Hart, we help amazing organizations achieve remarkable things, and we do this through enabling digital change capability within the not-for-profit sector. We are specialists and focused on the NFP and membership sector solely. We're fiercely independent, and impartiality is the heart of everything that we do, and we'd like to be our trusted and critical friend to our clients. In terms of how we do what we do, we separate our services into four kind of areas. There's the strategy area where we're helping organizations implement technology change strategy, setting out their course for how to implement technology change for good. Then moving to a selection phase where we help our clients find the right and ideal technology partners through a procurement process. And then we support them through implementation, governance, testing, project management. And then once the projects are live, we help them do the benefit realization piece through optimization and continuous improvement. This webinar this morning is the second one in a four-part series focused on data. So we've finished the first one, Landscape and Strategy. That recording is available online. And we're focused today on quality and management of data. The next webinar on the 26th of September, registration is open for that, as well as the fourth one on leveraging data for impact. So if you are interested in those events, please do feel free to register. The topic today is really focused on data quality. And before we get into the topic of data quality, I thought it was useful to set out mechanisms that you could use for defining what is data quality. The Data Management Association, the DAMA, is an organization that sets global standards for defining and assisting with data management tools, methodologies, and capabilities. And they have produced the Dimensions of Data Quality Framework, or the DDQ. So using that as a starting point, it's a measure of a data's condition based on a number of factors. Accuracy, is the data correct and free of errors? Is the data complete? Is all necessary data present and as it should be? Is the data consistent? And is it consistent across all systems wherever the data may appear? Timeliness. Is the record of the data available to you? Is it recent? Has it got a recency factor against it? And is it the most recent status available to you to use? What is its validity? Does it adhere to expected formats or change? It might be date ranges, etc., or currencies correctly formatted, etc. That's the sort of thing that validity looks at. And then uniqueness, which is probably one of the most important ones, which is this record unique, and is it the only one in a data set to prevent duplicates? Underpinning all of that, the data needs to be secure, which is more of a system architecture thing, but can also influence where the data that needs to be encrypted is encrypted at rest, and that you're adhering to the best governance standards that you can do. So now that we've set out what good data sort of principles look like, we'll look at those a bit later. Looking at the importance of data quality, I thought it was always good to set the scene, and the best way to set the scene is really start having a look at a couple of quotes, and statistics are always a good way to get a webinar like this off to a good start. Data is useful, but really high quality, well understood, auditable data is priceless. And that's kind of a quote from one of the founders and distinguished analysts at Gartner, and I think they know quite a lot about the value of data. But it's also juxtaposed against a statement that I really like, which is data is like garbage. You better know what you're going to do with it before you collect it. And the interesting thing about this isn't just its validity in the context of data quality and storing data without a principle for knowing what you're going to do with it and how you're going to continue managing it. I think what's more interesting about this is the actual author of this quote is none other than Mark Twain, who was a writer, humorist, essayist, and I like to think of one of the world's early data geeks. This quote of his actually stems from something in the late 1800s. So quite an interesting thing that even at that stage, we were starting to be concerned about data and the quality of data, probably more from an accounting perspective, but certainly that was the nucleus of where, the concept of data quality starts. Moving forward, I thought it was interesting to look at the growth of data and the impact that the growth of data across all of our organizations has on the quality of data. So looking at an interesting stat, it is assumed that we are creating 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every day. Now, I'd never really understood the scale of a quintillion, so I thought I'd express it in zeros. So that's 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created every day. Now, most of us don't consume bytes or understand, we know what they are, but we don't think of them as a measure of a unit of measure. So how do we translate that? We're creating 13.125 billion books every day in terms of an equivalent value for data creation. What does that translate to? That is 18 times the size of all the books contained in the British Library created every day in terms of data. Now, that's a lot of data being created, but probably what's more relevant or more scary is that we're creating 90% of the data that we've created across the world has been created in the past 2 years. And if we use Kreider's law, which is a metric for assessing how fast data growth will accelerate, we're expected to grow that number every 2 years, doubling it in size. So that illustrates that we're all going to be collecting a lot more data, which is great because great data is a source of information. It helps us make better decisions. It enables things like personalization, automation across our systems, which are all great things, but it's growing. And one thing that we know from a software engineering perspective is as data volumes increase, quality decreases. So I thought this would be an interesting point to jump off to a poll to ask the question, how confident are you in your organization around the quality of your data? So you should see a poll that's now popped up. If you don't mind, putting in the definition that defines you. These polls are all anonymized, so don't worry. The data police will not be knocking on your door, irrespective of the answer that you put in. So we're starting to see quite a lot of people answering the question right now. So we'll let that go through. And it's starting to shape up to what I would probably imagine would be the case when we set this question out there. So I think that's probably a good time. I think we've got most of people responded. So I think if we can share those results. So I think that's quite an interesting point. And I think we're seeing, there are a few respondents who think that they absolutely understand their data. They're able to audit it and they know exactly where their issues are and they're dealing with them, which is great. And I applaud those on the call who are capable of doing that. What's interesting is that it's the somewhats that are the most prevalent on the call today, which is we're able to audit our data, but we're not really able to improve the quality. So it'd be great to look into the reasons for why that probably is the case. And then coming in sort of third is we're not sure. We're not able to audit our data and we don't therefore know the degree of its quality. And then lower down, there are a few people on the call today who would really like to just, know more about data, and they're new to the concept of data quality. So welcome to you all. Wanted to use this as a good jumping off point to possibly ask our guests on the call today, either Nuna or Marios, what your sort of thoughts on the data that you're seeing there?
Well, it's interesting. I would have expected a lot more to be unsure, I guess. So it's interesting. I mean, it's probably a good thing. The fact that the lead there is somewhat, I guess, there's a degree of confidence, but we're not entirely 100% sure. So no, it's interesting.
Yeah, I almost wanted to jump off and say I'd love to actually hear from those people who voted in the very category. Maybe they should be giving this webinar rather than me. So yeah, that'd be great to get some questions or possibly some dialogue when we get to the Q&A piece. So I thought there was an interesting point now to actually look at that point around, what is the quality of data and in our industry. So I went looking for some data. There is a really very useful and impressive report delivered by Data Orchard, which looks at data maturity in the not-for-profit sector. And they've been running that report since 2020. So they have 3 years of data that we can look at. And the question that underpins this particular data example is, our data is complete, accurate, and where necessary, kept up to date. So effectively, in context of our poll, it'll be very similar to the very category. So if you scored high here, then you have a very high confidence in your data. So looking how the numbers came up, if we look at how things have kind of progressed over time, we have in 2020, we have kind of the top 2 categories where people agree that the data is complete, accurate, and where necessary, kept up to date. That contributes about 31%. And then the bottom sort of bracket, ignoring the bits in the middle, there's 44% of people who are not that confident. They disagree that their data is complete, accurate, and where necessary, kept up to date. What's really interesting is if you look at that trend, as time has progressed over the past 3-4 years, that confidence has decreased. So less people who responded to the survey feel confident about the accuracy and completeness of their data. Now, we'd expect that over time, with more people paying attention to it, more tools available, newer technologies, this would be improving. But it's not. And I think it's interesting that we're sort of seeing that the disagrees are increasing, so the lack of confidence and the lowering of confidence kind of meeting in the middle. So I think the possible reason for that is that more organizations are starting to pay more attention to their data. And so whilst people might have felt more confident earlier in the data set, they feel now that they're probably not as confident as they probably could be. So things are changing there, which is an interesting thing. I wanted to segue now to inviting one of our guests, Nuna, from the IOM3, which is the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining, to share her experiences around this, because I think Nuna has got some great examples and talking points that she could share with us. So Nuna, I wanted to hand over to you, if you wouldn't mind, just sort of sharing your perspective on the topic of data.
Thanks, Alan. So we embarked on a digital project back in 2019, and the aim of that was to combine various systems where we had a lot of different types of data. So the main system we had was our membership system, but we had separate systems for events registration. We had a sales system, email marketing, and then we had a lot of contacts on our website as well. We were over into the hundreds of thousands of contacts on our website. And the aim of the project was to try and combine these into one system. And we knew that we had a challenge because there was obviously a lot of duplicated data, redundant data that wasn't very good quality, duplicates, missing data. So we had quite a challenge to decide how to pull all this together. And obviously, we wanted the new system to have the best data quality that we could have. So we kind of started from a clean sheet. And so the main focus of our activity then was the membership data. We were also challenged because we had a very short time scale to actually deal with it. We had 5 months to get our system up and running because we were against a hard deadline. Basically, the legacy system that we had, they were going to pull the plug on that. So, it had to be done. So that was a question of prioritization. And what we decided to do, the way we tackled it, was looking at the membership data and the associated financial data. And the legacy system we had wasn't great at being able to interrogate data and actually clean it up. So we had to take a fairly broad brush approach. We did do a kind of deep dive into the structure of what we had to try and consolidate and make sure that what we took over was kind of the best we could. But I think it's always a worry at that point, because you're thinking, well, should we take this just in case, or are we doing the right thing? But in the end, I think the member data and the financial data that we took over was as clean as we could get it, and worked for us in the launch of that first part of the project. So going onwards, what we did with the other data was essentially not to import it in bulk. We did some cleaning up before we actually imported it, and then it was a question of saying, well, do we need this? Is this actually adding data? And if it is adding contacts or information, then we want it to be as clean as possible. So we were, I think, quite particular in terms of not muddying our nice new database with the data that we knew was not good quality. And that happened on a phased approach. So, for example, with the event registration data, we essentially imported that on an ad hoc basis as and when that was required. It was resource intensive, and it did require all of the team to actually buy into that process and to understand the importance of making sure that what we ended up with worked, and that we could get good information, good reporting out of the system. But it's very much an ongoing process. So we're still at this point, I mean, we're almost 5 years down the line, not from the launch of the system, but from when we started. And we are still, now that we've got a new system that can actually interrogate the data, we are still finding holes and incomplete data or duplicates. So one of the areas that we didn't really have time to tackle was the organization's data on our system. I mean, we knew, we tried to do a bit of tidying up on organizations and deduplication, but it wasn't really possible. It was a manual process on the old system. So we did take over our organization's data kind of in bulk, and we had over 36,000 organizations on the system. Through a process of deduplication over the last couple of years, we've reduced that to about 11,000. So it has been a continuous process. It's involved people on different teams committed to making improvements, but we have managed to do that, and we are continuing to do it. And one of the things I think is really important when you've got a new system and you want to ensure data quality is thinking in advance about the data that's coming in. So we were cleaning up organizations, but at the same time, we were getting organizations added by our members as they signed up, new members signed up or changed their jobs. And we found that we had to look at that process to make sure that the data that was coming in was complete and accurate, and not duplicated. And likewise for member registrations. So, it's typical when somebody signs up on a system, you can't remember your password. So we found that people were, instead of doing a password reset, or if that didn't work for them, they were registering again with a different email address. And so we reviewed our processes at the login stage, so that we actually had the system identify whether that person with that email address already had an account, so that we could make sure that they knew they had an account and use the password reset instead of creating a new account. So it's kind of, you need, as well as taking over data and keeping on top of it and finding the gaps and trying to make it better quality on an ongoing basis, it's really important to look at what's coming into your systems and making sure that that is of good quality as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think there are a lot of people sort of asking questions as we're going, so I might interlude a few as we go along, Nuna, because I think there's some great lessons that you've learned in there. For me, I thought the one that was most interesting is that you were quite happy to see your organization, number of organizations captured, reduced. I think a lot of people are obsessed with bigger numbers and getting things bigger, etc. But I think you were quite happy to get to a position where you actually knew what the honest, true number was, which is a great reflection on data quality. So I thought that was great. I'm just going to ask a quick question here that's come through, and we'll tackle some of them as we get to the Q&A session. There's a great question that's kind of, how did you create that culture of data responsibility, which is something I'd like to talk about later as well. Did you do anything to sort of engender this focus with the rest of your team and get people to take responsibility for it?
Well, I think I think we were already in a position with the legacy database. There was a lot of frustration about ability to interrogate, and the fact that, if two different people tried to do a search for the same thing, we got different answers. So I think everybody was very conscious of the fact that the data is important, and also in terms of the quality of the data on an ongoing basis. I think showing people what they can access that will help them to do their job in terms of reporting, and how valuable that is if it's good data, kind of focuses the mind on making sure that what they put in is accurate. Our old systems, we spent a lot of time downloading data and uploading it because manually, because we had no other way of joining things up. And I think that was the relief of not having to do that, and having a system where there was kind of one version of the truth, as they say, was something that people want to maintain and kind of buy into. That's not to say that there aren't issues, and that there are people who make mistakes, or data comes in that isn't good quality, but I think generally, I mean, I've been a data champion. I think that's the other thing, is trying to really stress the importance and kind of get people to buy into it, because if you've rubbish in, rubbish out, if you've got bad data, then you can't really see the information that you need to do your job.
Yeah, which is great. I love the fact that the data champion, and I think that it's imperative, and we'll talk about this a bit later, is that it's at a high senior sort of management level, so that it's top down and everybody's buying into it, and ensuring that this isn't just a departmental or an IT specific function, that this is a universal ownership across the organization. Which is great. There's a question here, which might be a good point to bring Marios in. So Marios from Bluelight was the technology partner who worked with IOM3. And the question's from Annette, which is, how do you handle duplication of organizations, different departments in organizations, or different offices and or head offices of the same company? So, where you've got, organizational data where things are quite different, but you're trying to pull people into one view. And I'd be interested to get both of your opinions on how that worked.
I can probably tackle it from a general perspective, and I'll probably hand over to Nuna to talk specifically about the Institute. I guess systems now are able to do much more sophisticated structures and modeling of data. So I guess on a general basis, having sort of clean organizations, but then having a hierarchical structure between, say, the organization itself, and then being able to sort of have child relationships to denote branches or you know, different locations of organizations, all of that can be done. It's just a case of kind of modeling it and putting it together. But I guess from your perspective, Nuna, about organizations specifically, I guess, how did you go about sort of deduplicating those?
So that is a big challenge, especially in organizations like universities, because obviously there are people whose addresses are different departments, different postcodes. But what we have tried to do is to have that hierarchy in place. So have the HQ or the main part of the organization as the parent, and then the others are the children of that organization. And really the way we've deduplicated is essentially by postcode, because I don't think there's another easy way of doing it. We've got a lot of members who are at Rolls-Royce, and Rolls-Royce have also a lot of sub companies all around the UK, and that was one of our biggest challenges. And you know, the other problem is that organizations move. They change their names. It's a difficult challenge, but I think the hierarchy always helps. If you can assign one as the parent, and then at least you can actually find and see that data and arrange it so that you can see where there are duplicate postcodes. But it does, you know, it's not something you can do automatically. It does obviously involve a degree of human intervention to actually judge which ones are genuine and should be retained, and which ones should be merged.
Yeah, I think the human intervention piece is a really important one. I think that sometimes there's an expectation that it can just be done in script and, you know, automation of routines and data cleansing tools, but there's always that ability for a human to look at and go, but I know the answer, and I can therefore take action to improve the quality because I've got the context. There's one final question which I'd like to pass to you guys, and then we can move on and we'll try and cover the rest of the questions. So there's some great questions coming in. But I think this is a really relevant one, is how do you prioritize data quality, which everybody I think wants to do more. But a common theme in our sector is limited resources. You know, you're not necessarily we're not all you know, benefiting from the sort of the size and scale of the banks and, you know, insurance organizations, big commercial enterprises who can dedicate resource to this. You probably didn't have dedicated, you know, data analyst people who just do this. So how do you find the resources to make this challenge and tackle it?
I guess I can probably talk to that more generally again and possibly hand over to Nuna. So I guess the critical aspect is having some ownership. This could be an individual, this could be a team. There's got to be some ownership. Somebody's got to want to do it and be able to take that responsibility on. Beyond that, of course, is prioritizing. Certainly in the Institute's case of Nuna, they prioritized membership and finance data because that was the next checkpoint coming up there in yours. But I guess, and I think you personally mentioned it earlier, Alan, about being able to, I see from senior management, I guess, who are always asking for reports, stats to drive operationally and strategically, is I guess being able to show them the value of I guess allocating resources and taking seriously data quality. What do you think, Nuna?
Definitely needs a champion. I think that, you know, that top down, and we've done it, you know, in, for example, the deduplication. We've got a team of different people who each do, you know, a little bit. We don't have a huge resource. Sometimes people have more time, sometimes they don't have time. So it is kind of having a champion and then spreading the responsibility within teams. And I think there's also a bit of sort of carrot and stick, you know, showing people how data quality is important in their job and what it means in terms of what they can do and find out. But also when you find things that aren't looking as they should, to make sure you actually flag those up and go back to that team and say, you know, please, could you take a look at this? Because this isn't correct, or going forward, how can we improve the data input process? And sometimes we've come back to your team, Marius, to actually ask them to help us create views of where we know that there might be some data that isn't quite right, and look at the processes to see how those can be improved so that the data quality is maintained. So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach, really. But as the data champion, and that kind of, this is really important to us as an organization, I think is key.
Yeah, which is great. So I think we've got quite a few questions, which is great. So we've still got some time for Q&A. I'm going to move things on a bit, but thank you, Nuna and Marius, for contributing there and for sharing the story. So I think if we move to a kind of looking at the consequences of data quality, and I think that some of these will be known to people, but I think it's always useful just to illustrate these, to draw attention to kind of the scale of what's out there and why this is more of an organizational challenge than just an individual one. So starting sort of looking at the member or the donor or the stakeholder, and let's call them the customer for the purpose of this exercise, is you really risk a poor customer experience if the data isn't great. So we're moving to a world where we're trying to automate and personalize more, because we know that improves engagement, and there are lots of benefits from doing that. But if the data is wrong, and there is one organization that I deal with as an individual, and they routinely put my so it's an organization where I'm representing my son. They routinely put my son's middle name in as my middle name, and it just shows me that they don't really have a care of the data, and it's an organization that should be really quite focused on quality of data, specifically around minors. And so that little experience, whilst I know and trust the organization, every time I see one of those little emails as a touch point, my brain immediately says there's something wrong here. And we have to be conscious of those little things that can have big impact. So it's tiny little things there. We're about getting the data right. And I can see the situation because I've updated the data in kind of the portal, but for whatever reason, that data isn't getting to the email marketing system where they're personalizing the data there. So, poor customer experience around that quality is an obvious one. I think the one that probably is the biggest one to people to think about is really reputational damage. There are a number of stories, especially in sort of the more sort of charity side of our sector, where the reputational damage for getting that data wrong can have wide-ranging consequences. And there are more and more people paying more attention to data. GDPR, ICQ, sort of ICO people paying more attention to it means that there's greater risk that your reputation could be damaged. And there are a lot of other things that then spin out from that. So then people start paying attention to the customer experience, etc. So I think, ensuring that your organization's reputation is safeguarded and protected really does start by looking at the quality, of data and how that can impact it. There are examples where you can lose revenue, if you've got incorrect data in the transactions. If you're looking to do renewals and the renewal data is wrong, or you've got duplicates in there. There are certain scenarios that I've been involved where there was an organization that instead of taking £10 from 18,000 donors, took £18,000 from 10 donors. And so the consequences of that was that their direct debit was automatically shut off at the bank, because the bank and the direct debit guarantee meant they couldn't allow those transactions to continue. So that had a massive impact on that organization's ability to transact. So, there are real world issues here, and it isn't just about, getting my son's middle name wrong. It's about, being able to ensure you can do things. That then leads to regulatory sort of lack of compliance issues, where if you are in a highly regulated space, and some of us are, then, this has consequences, and it's important that we make sure that from a regulatory and compliance perspective, these things are all covered. I think the one that often gets lost or taken for granted is employee morale. I think data wrangling and trawling through data mismatching and stuff, it can be a sort of unrewarding job. And if it's continuous and you're not addressing the root cause, then a lot of your staff and the time gets spent on these things, and morale is then impacted. Poor decision making is obviously, you know, a possible consequence if the data is wrong. So if the quality isn't there, you probably could be making decisions where it isn't right. And I think, you know, speaking to sort of Nuna's sort of example about how many organizations they thought, you know, might have been in the data, if you trust the data, you might be making a you know, decision that might be the wrong one. But I think actually, if you then are concerned about that, you probably stop making decisions, which is probably an even bigger issue. So the ability for people to make a decision is great if they have the data. But if people start questioning the quality of the data, they start questioning whether they should make a decision on that data at all. So decision making sometimes stops. And then, you know, if we talk about the inability to transact, I think, Marius, you've got some interesting perspectives on this in terms of, you know, around things like renewals and the impact of data going wrong there.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about renewals, obviously specific to the membership sector, for a lot of organizations, it can be an annual process. It could be a major, if not, you know, one of the major elements of their revenue. It's kind of a set piece exercise that happens, say, once a year. And I guess it's quite an anxious time if you don't trust your data. Actually running your renewals for thousands and thousands of members. I mean, every single one of those points, you know, 1 to 8, could be impacted. I guess not being able to trust your data could be, and we've certainly heard of organizations, for example, that, I don't know what it was in your case, Nuna, but for example, being so stressed about it that they would run the process over months, you know, checking and checking and checking and checking before they actually press the button. Which is hugely inefficient, and like I said, ticks all of those points that you've made there.
Yeah, and there are, you know, I think that's that sort of thing about, you know, checking the data and there are then increased costs to that because there's resource costs. We end up spinning up additional environments to just do the data checking, and then there's a question of whether the data is here or not. You know, so these things have, you know, downstream consequences, and they're not just contained to just the, you know, the end of the year preparing for the renewal run, but they can have consequences throughout the year. So I thought this was a good opportunity to then launch another poll, and that is to ask everyone if they would mind, you know, where do they think that their data quality issues stem from? So there's a poll launched up here, and it would be great if everyone could just take, you know, 15 seconds just to think about this and to post. You know, what they think is the factors that hold them back from achieving that kind of nirvana of perfect data quality. So we're getting quite a few responses coming through, and I think we've got the majority of people have kind of voted. Oh, there's a quick burst there. It's always nice to think you can comment on these numbers as they're coming in, but the sliders are moving around quite a lot as people respond. So I'll probably give it a little more time just to make sure we've got all perspectives, but it seems to have stopped moving. So I think we'll display the poll there for everyone to digest as well, which would be great. So looking at the results, you know, the options are, where do we see that you think that the greatest data quality issues stem from? And I think interesting there is that you know, people saying that the highest number is we have multiple data sources that are poorly integrated. So it's quite hard to, you know, figure out which is the single source of truth, which record is owned there. And I think that's something that tools can help in, but I think that's also probably a consequence of historic systems and lots of fragmented, siloed systems that are probably more in a legacy space. So it'd be interesting to know, you know, what are the reasons behind that. But then looking at it, I think which is really interesting for me, is that the second most prevalent one is that there is no culture of data quality in our organization, which is concerning, but is also actually the nucleus of this presentation today, is to try and get people to realize that it's not an IT thing, that it is a culture thing, and it needs to be part of an organization's culture. And I think that was one of the reasons why I was so pleased to have Nuna and Marius talk about this, because I think they demonstrate very clearly and articulately that having that data culture is actually a way to start tackling this thing, and then the rest of it will fall into place. Other responses there of note, which are all kind of balanced, is they lack the capability to manage the data to a high degree. Our systems make it very hard, and I know, Nuna, you and I have spoken about, you know, your legacy systems were quite difficult just to be able to interrogate the data, to be able to score it and be able to understand where it was an issue or not. So thank you to everyone for contributing there. I think those are really interesting to see where people are. Looking at kind of, sharing now some principles for improving data quality. These are sort of mine. I may have said some of these already, so some of these won't be too much of a surprise. But for me, data quality is not just an IT issue. I know that IT, because they're the custodians of the systems and the data, ultimately, they're probably the ones who understand it at a sort of technical level, but this really isn't an IT only issue. Sure, they have a role to play, but there's so much more that the organization and everyone in the organization should be doing to contribute to that. So I'd suggest, assign departmental responsibility, but still focus on individual accountability. So that means that each individual in the organization needs to be responsible and accountable for the quality of data. So if they see something that's wrong, they should fix it. They should have the tools, they should have the training. And if they don't, they should at least have the ability to escalate that and say to someone who does have access or, the rights or permissions to be able to address that. And then trying to create that departmental responsibility so that, the fundraising team is responsible for the quality of their data, and they ask IT or, third-party suppliers or the tools for help in achieving that. But it's ultimately, for my opinion, needs to be designed, at a departmental level, but then still, reporting up to that data champion or data steward. And a point that I think Nuna raised in our discussion the other day was, don't try and boil the ocean. Don't try and do this all in one hit. Recognize that it's going to take you time, and identify your highest priority data sets that will deliver the greatest value, and then work to fixing those. Make it easy for users to fix quality issues. I think this is probably a great outcome of getting a new, fresh, all singing, all dancing, shiny new system like you now have, Nuna. Because then there are tools and the interfaces there. So when you're thinking about embarking on a new technology platform, think about, are there tools as part of that platform? Does it make it easy for people to do it? Are there controls in place so that people can't just make changes without thinking about it? And then I think standardization is your friend. There are a number of times when I've seen, especially when you're bringing multiple data sets together and you're trying to achieve that single source of truth, different things can be formatted differently. I've seen sort of personal experience where, even just titles aren't consistent across different systems. So, there's that mismatch of how data is standardized. So the more you can standardize, create a data dictionary, and whenever someone's thinking about creating a new field, consult the data dictionary to try and achieve some degree of standardization and keep striving for it. I would definitely encourage using partners. Marios from Bluelight would definitely, is instrumental in helping, IOM3, and they can bring tools. There are third-party tools out there. I know that IOM3 use a particular data quality tool. But don't assume that just having a tool or a great partner is the opportunity to outsource ownership of that. You really, as an organization, should be driving it, working with your technology partners and tools, but ultimately the ownership should rest within the organization, and preferably with a data steward. A mantra that I use in almost too many ways, but I think is really relevant here, is if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. So start to understand what is your current, score or ability to audit your current data, so that you can write it down and then have a commitment to improving it. It's not a fix once and forget scenario. This is a constant journey, and one that you should see as one that will generate benefits over time. And the more you build a muscle memory for implementing data quality capability within your organization, the easier it gets. And I think that's probably a topic we may touch on with one of the questions later in the Q&A session. And then for me, I think really one of the most important ones is focus on identifying and addressing the root cause, not just the symptoms. So, quite often we'll see that people will see, a data quality issue and fix it in the CRM, live, which is great. And that's speaks to, giving people the tools to make decisions themselves. But then understanding, why is that data coming in like that? Is it constantly doing that? Is there something on the portal or a web form, or have you got a form, out there in your email marketing platform that you've forgotten about that's generating leads, and the data is coming in there where title is mismatching with, what that form is doing. So always look to see if you can identify the root cause of the quality issue, and then, you will fix that root cause and you won't have to continually deal with the symptoms. There is some guidance here in terms of how to develop a data quality strategy. We've tried to summarize this quite a lot, and I don't think that we want to get into the detail of this. We'll absolutely suggest that you maybe review the recording here. We will share the PDF of this presentation deck so that you can review this. But I've split it up into 5 stages and thinking about it in terms of creating a foundation, and that's about getting senior leadership buy-in, as Nuna demonstrates very clearly, that it becomes a top-down, organization-wide ambition to achieve greater data quality within your organization. Nominate a data steward or a data owner, and then nominate owners by department. So going back to that departmental responsibility, that's really important to be able to say, there are people in departments that are responsible for the data. And if you have, reward mechanisms, you can reward people for doing that. Agree what good looks like, and then agree KPIs that you can roll out. Absolutely start to then create a culture of data quality, and that demonstrates your organization's commitment to addressing this and to continuing to improve it, much the same way that you would with quality and diversity. Data quality kind of also needs to sit at that level, in my opinion, and communicate your data quality policy. Ensure that people have read it and that they can say yes, they understand it, and that they could subscribe to it. And I think incentivizing users in whichever way is relevant to your organization is probably one of the keys to creating that culture. If you want to achieve, cultural behaviors and values, you kind of also have to incentivize them, not just talk about them. Then moving through to actually, how do you start it? Do an audit or a discovery, map and prioritize your data assets. Which ones are the most important? Back to that point about, not trying to boil the ocean. You're going to have to figure out what your priorities are. One of the questions that's come through is actually around how do you prioritize? So hopefully we can answer that in the Q&A shortly. And then try and track your data issues centrally. So if you have a help desk, try and get people to log data issues so that you can draw statistics on it. And you'd be amazed at how that helps you find the root cause. Back to that scenario where maybe you've got a form that might be out there on the email marketing platform that's not, creating synchronized data. If someone looking at those stats says, we've seen five tickets in the past, 3 weeks come through that all look the same, that enables someone to start looking for the root cause rather than just the symptom. So being able to track them centrally and share those, create KPIs from them, and then try and ultimately understand why data quality issues are happening, and then really decide if you are fixing the symptom or the cause. If you need to do something around a renewal run, or you've got a campaign to run, or you have a specific initiative you need to run, and simply dealing with the symptom is the fastest way of dealing with it, then do that. But don't forget to come back and fix the symptom. If you're under time pressure, don't focus all the time on fixing the symptom, because that could be time consuming. So you will need to use judgment, but remember the two work, in sequence and in hand. And then taking action. So develop an action plan based on those priorities, set objectives, define owners, and allocate them actions. There were some fairly, things that slipped in there with what Nuna was saying, but there was absolutely a plan to achieve those objectives, and then provide training to staff on how to tackle data entry. Don't assume they will know that they can do it on their own. Ensure you have a backup. There are a number of times I've done it myself where you go, great, I can fix that, and then you fix it, and it may break something else. You may need to roll back. You may need to get that backup again. So ensure that you have a backup before you take action, and then review, rinse, and repeat, and just keep looking at it that way. And then you can start to move to an improved stage where it becomes a regular review thing, possibly every quarter, every 6 months. Absolutely reward positive performance here. Find ways of rewarding people publicly, saying they've done a great job on fixing the data, and this is really important to us because as an organization, it's important, and then present your KPIs. So Marissa, you've got a great example about sort of getting the balance right that I wanted you to talk to, if you could, quickly, about flexibility versus integrity.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of, I guess, there's always a trade-off, particularly during projects, sort of new digital projects, and particularly when you're looking across data, web, potentially CRM. Those teams often, sometimes, can be completely separate within a project environment. So what will happen, for example, is that The web team will be looking at the best user experience. The data team will, of course, be interested in the cleanest, best possible data. So it's always a little bit of a trade-off. You know, do we capture this type of information online to make it easy for the online user? And we're not too concerned about how the data comes in. I mean, a very obvious example, I think, is around organizations, which is, of course, relevant to what Nuna was talking about earlier. Do you allow people to, you know, to search and find an organization and link themselves to it, or do you allow them to sort of just free text a new organization? One is obviously very quick and easy for the user online, but of course it means that you just have a proliferation of duplicate data coming through. So being able to sort of align a team, particularly on a new project, to make sure that it's a data-focused, data-centric approach to it is key to avoid that. Certainly, there are a number of different models, and I guess one is to make sure, as we were talking earlier in terms of the prioritization, is setting out what the perfect picture looks like, perfect customer picture in terms of the data model that you have for them, but then being able to audit what realistically you have in place. And that sort of realistic audit of what you have and what you might need for that perfect view can then be prioritized to drive forward how you deal with your data.
Yeah, that's great. That's a very, I think, a very pertinent and relevant, you know, example there. So I think we've got to that point where it'd be great if we could continue to possibly go towards you know, bringing back to the Q&A session. I've been reviewing the questions as they've been coming in, and I think we've broken this up by making it as discussion based as possible. But there's a great question that's come through from Kat Gray, and it says, on the culture of data responsibility, how do you decide how many privileges to give colleagues? Can everyone delete or merge records? How do you balance the risks versus rewards in having more people able to make irreversible changes? So I think that would be great to know, Nuna, how did you tackle that in your experience? And then perhaps Maris, from a sort of more broader sort of, you know, what are the available options to you?
So I think we have quite a limited number of users that can actually delete data, but obviously most users of the system can deactivate. So it is possible to roll back if there's an error made. So yes, you obviously have to have those controls in place. And I think early on in the project, I think we had more users able to delete, and we had few issues. So said, okay, we're going to restrict this because it is a risk. But, you know, deactivation is kind of a step there. And then if you then review deactivated records and you're confident that they can actually be removed, then that is possible. I can't remember the second part of the question.
I guess it was just about getting the balance right between the risks and rewards, and then, you know, how do you deal with making irreversible changes? And I think if I believe changes can always be reversed if you can spot them correctly and you've got the right controls in place.
Yes, I mean, we have gone back to Bluelight on a couple of occasions saying, oh, you know, so-and-so has deleted this by accident, or even things like we have an entity called groups. If you add an end date to a group, it means that the same end date gets added to all the members. So you end up with no members in that group. That is a question of going back to Bluelight and saying, you know, this mistake has been made. Could you just fix it by reinstating the original date? So yeah, things happen, but again, that then is a question of training and making sure that whoever the user is aware of the issue, and it doesn't happen again. But that can be quite a tricky balance to maintain. The tool we use, the merge tool, I mean, that's something that for organizations and for contacts, that's something that's very useful, because basically when you have a record, the original record is retained as an archived record, and again, that is something that is reversible if it turns out that somebody's accidentally merged the wrong record, so that data isn't actually lost.
Yeah, I think there's interesting. There's a few people asking about tools. You know, which tool did you use? You know, what role do you think tools have to play in that? And I think you've got that great experience there where you're using a tool to help do some of the sort of more complicated pieces or help identify things, but you still have human beings taking ownership of the process and ensuring that it isn't just left to the tool.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it is difficult because sometimes the tool can identify that duplicates exist. And if you want to merge the duplicates, sometimes you can end up with, I don't know, 9 organizations that basically the tool identifies as duplicates. That can be very difficult to look at such a large number all in one go. So I do sometimes revert back to actually going back into the system and looking at a view and making sure I've got all the different elements of an address so that I can then compare addresses in the view rather than in the merge tool. And sometimes I go through it that way. So yeah, the tool is great, but it isn't necessarily the answer to everything. There must be some judgment involved as well.
Yeah.
From a platform technology perspective, we use Dynamics, and you can lock down to a very, very granular basis. So having a policy, thinking it through and applying it, I guess, in the system will attempt to give you that balance, but it's always a tricky one, of course.
Yeah, and in your opinion, Marios, are tools improving?
Yes, again, it caveated with there is no perfect tool out there at the moment. I guess with all the AI stuff happening at the moment, and I guess how AI fits into it. I mean, AI both needs data, obviously, to be driven, but it could potentially get to the point where, I guess, I'm not going to say it's going to be the same as a set of human eyeballs, but it can substantially make more efficient, I guess, that process. But there's always going to be a need for human interaction, as far as I can see, certainly for the next few years.
Yeah, and I think it raises an interesting point, actually, which may be relevant when we talk about our upcoming AI series that we're going to be running. Is AI is going to be great. It's going to do amazing things. There's a separate series that will talk about that, but it will be very data quality dependent. It will really, really require you to have very, very good data in place to be able to train it, and to extract the full value from it. So I think there's some interesting developments there. But yes, absolutely, I think the tools are correct, but like any tool, it needs to be done in context. So I think we've unfortunately gotten to that point where we have to start wrapping it up. I think there are a few questions that I would have loved to have answered. There's a really interesting observation from Connor Doyle about the review process and how to automate and standardize things, which I would love to have gotten into a conversation. So Connor, maybe you and I can have a chat about that, and we'll organize a call. I think you've got some very interesting, positive, interesting perspective that would have been great to get on into this. So I wanted to use this opportunity before we wrap it up to say thank you to Nuna and to Marios for sharing their experiences and answering questions and participating in today. So thank you to both of you. Thank you to everybody who has joined us on what is probably a tough day after last night's victory. So thank you for joining us. We've got a couple of things I just wanted to share just in terms of 2 quotes, and then we will put some links up that you can probably use. There's one about the data quality framework, which I've just pushed out there. It's a very interesting report if someone's very interested in understanding, the data quality assessment piece, how to audit the data. There's a very interesting document that I've just shared there. And then we will also be talking about, registrations for our up and coming data part 3 series, which continues the data series. It's about data migration and integration, which probably is a very interesting topic for most of you as well. And we've also just started promoting our UX series, which is around communities. But before we wrap it up, I thought I would just leave you all with a very brief set of quotes again. This one I think is important, is pertinent. I'm not quite sure who Donato Dorio is, but I think I like their quote, which is, without a systematic way, sorry, I think that's not actually sharing. Here we go. Without a systematic way to start and keep data clean, bad data will happen. So I think that's almost a given. And then looking forward, we hear a lot about this phrase, data is the new oil. And actually, I think it's useful, but it is actually, for me, a little annoying, because unless you're in the sort of data industry or you're in the oil industry, it doesn't really mean anything. So I'd like to leave you with this, which is my own take on it. Data is like fruit. It needs nurturing and attention from planting through to harvesting, transportation, storage, sale, and consumption. It cannot be fixed in the warehouse. So think of the database as the warehouse. Everybody involved in that supply chain, from planting the seed through to eating it, is involved in some way and needs to take responsibility for the quality of the fruit produced. I think that kind of speaks to the culture point about getting everybody in your organization to take responsibility for owning that piece. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Please do, if you're interested, register in the data series part 3, and you will shortly be getting a post-event survey. Please complete that. Tell us whether you loved it or hated today, and any feedback you can share allows us to improve the quality of what we deliver. So thanks again to our guests, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. I hope you have a great day and enjoy the sunshine. Thanks, everyone.